You're listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zeno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground Podcast. We always appreciate you joining us each and every week. Before we get to this week's guest, reminder, our website is live, hazardground.com. Go back and check out previous podcast episodes, get more pictures, bios on our guests, and a lot of great information about what we have coming up next. Also, don't forget to write us a rating and review on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Play, also on Spotify, all the places you can get the Hazard Ground. We really appreciate the ratings and reviews. Certainly help us get the word out there about the podcast and help us continue to get you guys some great guests each and every week. This week's episode is brought to you by our new sponsor, Blue Apron. Blue Apron delivers all the fresh ingredients and all the recipes you need in exactly the right proportions to make simple, seasonal, home-cooked meals. New recipes are created each week by Blue Apron's culinary team, so you'll learn to cook with new ingredients, cuisines, and cooking techniques. Meals are 500 to 800 calories and start at just $8.74 per serving. Shipping is always free. Listen, I've used Blue Apron many times already. Their food is delicious. Every sponsor on the Hazard Ground is a product that we've used and will stand by 100%. Otherwise, we wouldn't waste your time talking about it before the episode. So if you head over to our sponsors page on hazardground.com/sponsors, there are links with special offers just for our listeners that will be on there daily. And support for our sponsors goes right back into making Hazard Ground the best show it could possibly be. And now, for a limited time, if you order Blue Apron through our website, you'll get $60 off your first 6 weeks of deliveries. That's an amazing deal. So get on over to hazardground.com/sponsors and click on the Blue Apron banner and discover a better way to cook. This week's guest is a retired Army captain, most noted for writing a very popular blog/memoir titled Kaboom that was actually shut down by the Army. We'll explain why coming up. But he is also an author. The title of his novel is called Youngblood. It is about the Iraq War as well. He is Matt Gallagher, and he joins us on the Hazard Ground Podcast. Matt, welcome. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, a very interesting story. You know, it's funny, in all the research that we've been doing in this podcast and all the people that we've met and everything, I have not come across your story until we found out what it was. Yeah, I would have thought along the way, I would have heard something about your Kaboom blog, and, you know, because this stuff has a way of reverberating throughout the military very quickly as I'm still, you know, wearing the uniform all these years later. And I didn't know about this. So I found it very, very interesting as I dove into kind of researching your story that this whole thing had happened. But before we get to how the blog, which turned into a memoir, got started, tell us how your military career got its start.
Sure. So I was a college freshman when 9/11 happened. I joined Army ROTC program for a few different reasons: pay for school, serve my country. There was a plan involved, at least, which, you know, at 18 can seem very enticing. But, you know, I wasn't really sure what I was going to do in the Army or anything. 9/11 happened, and like a lot of people at that age in that moment, it felt like the Pearl Harbor of our generation, and in some ways that analogy still holds, and in many other ways it doesn't. But in that moment, at that time, it certainly felt apt. So you know, through a lot of conversations with my parents and my mentors in the ROTC program, I stayed in, honored my ROTC commitment, and also decided to go. I wanted to do combat arms. If I was going to do this Army thing, you know, I kind of wanted to do it from the front. So I ended up commissioning in 2005 as an armor officer, and became a cavalry scout platoon leader with the 25th Infantry Division based out of Hawaii. So had a 30-man scout platoon along with my platoon sergeant. We were on Strikers, which were, you know, pretty amazing vehicle, though that's, you know, something Iraq vets say. You talk to Afghanistan vets about the Striker, it's a whole different conversation. Deployed to Iraq in late 2007, kind of late part of the surge there. We knew going in it was going to be a 15-month tour, so you know, we weren't going to be you know, extended once we were there. We already knew we were going to be there. I was going to be there for 2 birthdays. It was just going to be the way it was, and you know, it was kind of that 15-month long slog through counterinsurgency. It almost seems like a different era compared to the war stories emerging from Afghanistan and elsewhere now. But there was one cavalry troop living in a sectarian town just northwest of Baghdad. Directly to our west were the Marines in Anbar province. Directly to our north was the Grand Canal. Looking back on it, it was kind of a really interesting microcosm of the entire war. We had Sunnis, we had Shias, we had the Sons of Iraq, paid neighborhood watch operating. About 3 months into our tour, there was a Mahdi army uprising, led by Muqtada al-Sadr, of course. So, it was just kind of wild 15 months. The first 3 months were a little hairy. We had some firefights and everything. But after that, things really, really started to calm down. It felt like when we were there that what we were doing was working. A lot of money was involved, of course, a lot of forgiving of past sins with certain Iraqi militia allies and everything. But there was a kind of a tenuous peace that was growing. In the back of our heads, there was always this question of what could that peace hold if there weren't armed American soldiers, man in every corner. But when we came home in early 2009, we genuinely felt like the war had been won, or at least a corner had been turned. And it's interesting. In conversations with other Iraq vets from different parts of that war, I've come to realize over time just how rare a feeling that was. Right? Maybe you could get it from some of the guys that were over just during the invasion, but really at no other points in the war did people kind of come home feeling that way. But we did, and many of us were true believers in coin, which seems like a weird throwback. And hoping for the best that maybe that tenuous peace we'd fought so hard for could hold in Iraq, and obviously history has proven otherwise.
Well, and again, when he says coin, he's talking about counterinsurgency. It's just the military's abbreviation for it for those civilians listening. But you went through a lot there, and I do want to debate that point with you about whether we won or lost. And my two deployments, my first one was 05 to 06, and my second one was the closeout in all of 2011. So I was there for the very end of this whole thing.
Okay.
And it's varying perspectives. But let's back up for a minute, because you were in ROTC prior to 9/11, and then 9/11 happened in ROTC. You spoke of the conversations that you had with your family and your parents. What were those conversations like? What were they about?
So my parents both come from military families. My mom was a Navy brat, and my dad was the son of a Navy medic, and both grandfathers had served in World War II and Korea. Then I had an uncle who served in Vietnam, but both my parents protested Vietnam. So, looking back on it, I think my brother and I were raised with a very healthy respect for military service and military members, but a bit of healthy skepticism towards how military forces applied. So it was these ideas, these conversations mattered to us. Not only was I going to wear the Army uniform, but what was I going to be doing in my time there, and what did that really mean? I think my parents just wanted to really make sure that I wasn't being starry-eyed about this, or being caught up in the moment. That I wasn't reading heroic propaganda. That if I was going to sit down and study this, that I was reading books and ideas that dealt with war forthrightly and honestly. And once I came to the conclusion that this is what I wanted to do, and I knew what combat actually could entail, they were very supportive. I think like any good parent, they just wanted to make sure that I had a full understanding of what war could look like and could entail, and it's not John Wayne's Green Berets.
Well, hang on a second. So it's interesting. Your parents protested the Vietnam War. Did they protest the Iraq War?
They did not. No.
Okay, why?
Well, I mean, they were college students when they protested Vietnam, and there's different responsibilities than when you're 25 years later and you're a parent with a career.
Sure.
And I think like a lot of people in 2002, 2003, shortly after 9/11, there were questions of American safety and American security. I think they and I certainly had deep misgivings about how Iraq was related to 9/11. But Colin Powell was a man we all respected a lot, and I think that was a changing moment for those conversations when he went in front of the United Nations and made the case for the Iraq invasion. So it seems I guess it was 15 years ago, but in many ways there were coherent arguments that could be made for the Iraq invasion being tied to American national security.
And the only reason I ask that, I'm just curious that, typically that thought process of anti-war holds the line across different generations. And beyond that, you talked about your parents wanting to have an understanding of war. Well, they had never been, and they protested war. So I'm wondering what viewpoint they were coming from in trying to give you an understanding of war.
Well, being the children of veterans, being a sibling of a Vietnam veteran, they dealt with it directly as family members, as our family members do, and just as thinking citizens of a republic. I think I in my writing I've come to realize that it's really dangerous for the veteran community to try to hold tight to these experiences and not share them and think that they can't be understood by people just because they weren't there. That's not that's A, I don't think it's healthy for individuals, and B, it's just not healthy for a country. It's on all of us as veteran or civilian, as citizens of the American Republic, to try to grapple with these big ideas of war and peace and combat experience. Just because somebody hasn't directly experienced it, they're not going to be able to maybe conjure up the smells and the feel and the feelings the same way. On the other hand, a little bit of distance can go a long way. For my money, the best war novel written by an American is The Red Badge of Courage by Stephen Crane. He was not a Civil War veteran. He was a generation. He came a generation later and came to the subject as a journalist who was interviewing aging Civil War veterans who were dying off and wanted to share their stories before they passed away. He put it all together and put together an incredible book that speaks to that experience better than anything I've read.
No, and listen, that's a very lucid point. I remember reading that in high school. I don't remember the whole lot of The Red Badge of Courage, but I know it was one of those summer books we had to read back in ninth grade English. So it's a fair point. I was just kind of curious where you how the conversation went, because we deal with a lot of people on the podcast who have those conversations with parents. Everybody who signed up post 9/11, has those conversations with their parents, and some parents are adamant that this is not what they want them to do, even though they can't stop them. They voice their concerns, and other parents are more kind of understanding, even though they are filled with trepidation. And you seem to have a very philosophical conversation with your parents, at least as you describe it, on multiple levels as to the upsides and downsides, as opposed to entering in the business they call the Army.
Yeah, I've been lucky. They're both really good people. They're both really smart people. They're both very caring people, and I think for them, they just wanted me to make as full and as sound a decision and as informed a decision as possible. And as long as I was doing that, they're going to be supportive no matter what. Though of course, I mean, what parent wouldn't be nervous and anxious about a child joining the military in a time of war?
Certainly. Okay, let's bring it back up to your first visit to Iraq. What time of year? This 2007 is when you initially get there?
Yeah, November.
Okay. I had left in April of '06, and
Okay.
so the 2007 was the beginning of the surge. So I'm kind of familiar with the area that you are and what was going on and everything. And what were your kind of orders when you got there? What were you told? What was your job? Everything as far as the pre-mission stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So we trained up really kind of for a very kinetic type of fights. A lot of force on force, a lot of shoot houses, that type of stuff. And then in the couple months preceding our actual deployment, we start hearing about CounterInsurgency and engaging the populace, and we're getting these rushed language classes and cultural awareness classes. And it seems like a really different thing. We get there, we're replacing unit from the 4th ID, no, I'm sorry, 1st Cav. 4th ID was there before 1st Cav, so we're replacing 1st Cav, and just trying to pick their brains as much as possible. What is counterinsurgency? What is I keep reading these big quotes from General Petraeus and everything, but what does counterinsurgency look like on the ground, on the platoon level? And the platoon sergeant and the PL that we were replacing were just like, honestly, you're just kind of like armed to beat cops. You're going to be a jack of all trades, a master of none. You just need to know this village. You need to know this town like the back of your own hand. We're going to introduce you to all the key players, Sunni and Shia. You get to know the mayor, get to know the police chief, get to know the Iraqi army major. But they're all important, but really it's the marketplace vendors that are going to give you the good stuff. Get to know the chatty children. Get to know the surly old men playing dominoes who are too old to care anymore. So they're if you establish a good relationship with them, they'll tell you what you want to know, because what the hell do they care? They're 75 years old. They're already facing death down. So it was on my dad's side. I come from a family of Irish cops, so I really kind of found myself trying to remember stories I'd heard about them growing up, and in that way of finding that balance of being an armed soldier on your guard 24/7, but also kind of an observer, somebody watching the corners while you're having a conversation. Just to see if anything's out of place, if anything's different than it was the day beforehand. And it was a lot of trial and error, drinking from a fire hose. You're a completely different corner of the world, in a completely different culture and society than the one you grew up in. But you got to learn fast. And we had a really good, smart platoon. I was blessed with some really capable NCOs, and slowly, surely, we got better at it, and slowly, surely, the war on the micro started to be safer, started to be a bit more peaceful, and same thing was happening on the macro as well.
How much different was the Iraqi society and the Iraqi culture than what you were prepared for?
Oh gosh, I think like most Americans, it was crazy different. The thing I remember most striking me most, I was 24 when I first got there, so young, but some of my soldiers were younger than that. So, but I'd never really seen poverty like that before.
Right.
The smells, particularly.
And I chuckle at that just because anybody who's ever driven through Baghdad, the water and the standing just tepid water that is there, that's just disgusting. It makes you want to vomit your Kevlar. Like, it literally is that bad of a smell.
Absolutely. So just raw and putrid,
Yep.
and yeah, American poverty isn't the same. A couple miles down on around Tampa, there was a trash dump. And we got called there one time because some helicopter pilots had seen some flash of metal or something. And so we walked through the dump, checked it out, but and came across religious exiles that were living there, one of my sergeants started handing out Beanie Babies to the kids, and they'd never seen anything like. They couldn't even fabricate what a Beanie Baby was. And it was nice and a sweet gesture. And but I just remember leaving. We called it Trash Village. Leaving Trash Village just kind of with a pit in my stomach. Like I wouldn't even begin to know, even if I had the resources and the means, I wouldn't even know how to help people living in that kind of squalor. That was a big shock. And I remember talking a lot with my NCOs and my commander who deployed before about reconciling that type of poverty with the mission. You're there to, part of it, you're there to help people, but there's also a war going on. So how do you balance all these things?
So you're there for how long before you decide to start writing the blog, which you titled Kaboom, and what was the impetus for starting it?
So I started blogging kind of right when we got there. We had, once or twice a week, we had a little bit of internet access out at the outpost. One of the reasons was when I was doing the research for our deployment, I'd come across some other military blogs that kind of helped me understand what counterinsurgency looked like on the ground level. And I found that helpful. And I'd also, I think it probably sparked something in me too. I'd grown up writing. I'd been on school newspapers and everything, and enjoyed it. It was kind of a way of making sense of the world. So I figured, I could do something like that, and be a way to keep in touch with family and friends. The war was very political at that point. So I didn't know how different people from different parts of my life maybe felt about it or felt about me being there. So I figured blog is a place they can go if they're interested, and I won't be ramming it down their throats if they're not. I
went the journal route. I decided to cut you off, but I went I kept a journal, and I wanted to more catalog my experience. I wanted to more be able to just talk about feelings and emotions and not hold back with certain things, because I knew, granted, this was 05 to 06, so I don't, the internet kind of there was a little bit different at the time. But beyond that, was there any desire to do that, to have something historical for yourself?
Yeah, I think so. A little, I think a catalog's a good word for it, a time capsule, perhaps. I think looking back, I didn't even know how somebody wrote books, but I probably had ambitions of, when I was old and gray, maybe someday writing about Iraq in some way, and part of the blog could be a time capsule for that. Not how I remember it smelling and sounding and happening, but how shortly after the moment those things actually were, and comparing those differences. Very similar impetus for that. I call it Kaboom. It's kind of a stupid joke now, but roadside bombs were the big threat. I'd already lost a couple friends that I'd gotten to know in ROTC and OBC to IED attacks. It was the quick killer, and it was on everybody's mind. So I was kind of a bit of a smartass, and thought, oh, okay, I'll call my blog Kaboom. It'll be a joke about IED strikes, and not a really funny joke, but a little bit of dark gallows humor there, and so we were off. So once the blog was up, and once or twice a week, when I had time, I just kind of wrote about what the platoon was doing. Whether that was rolling into a firefight between Iraqi army and insurgents, whether it was just coming across a war orphan trying to take care of his little brother, and trying to figure out how to get those kids linked up with the right people that could maybe take some care of them. And so it was just exactly like the platoon leader and platoon sergeant from 1st Cav had told us it would be. It was a little bit of this, a little bit of that. jack of all trades, masters of none. Waking up in dawn and raiding a house and putting together a sniper rifle that's been hidden into 7 different parts throughout the house. It was like a jigsaw puzzle. Trying to track them all down. How do you train for something like that? You don't really. You figure it out and do the best you can once you get there.
No, I mean, listen, anybody who's been to Iraq or Afghanistan in any part of the last, what are we going on, 17 years now, nothing you really could ever train for prepared you for what you saw. I mean, the best you can liken it to is athletes that don't train sport specific. You just stay in shape, right? Because you don't know what sport you're going to end up having to play when you get there. You just want to make sure you're in shape for whatever comes your way. So, I mean, that's understandable. When you sat down to write, were there any topics you were afraid to bring out or bring to light? I mean, I know in doing research that your superiors knew what you were doing, right? And they were okay with it? They blessed off on it?
They were until they weren't.
Well, yeah. I mean, initially. But at the outset, when you started writing, I mean, did you go to them first and say, hey, I want to do this, and they blessed off on it? Or did you start it and then they said, hey, we see that you're doing this, and then all of a sudden, they kind of had to give you the go-ahead?
No, I went to them and explored with them. They said it was fine. I needed to run posts by my commander when I could and when he could read them. But I think they viewed it maybe as kind of a counterinsurgent tool, right? A thing to put a face and story to the big bad scary American soldier, occupying American soldier or whatever. Oh, it's actually just a bunch of young men from all over the states trying to do the best they can in an impossible situation.
Right.
So what was your question before that?
No, just what were the topics? Were there any topics you were afraid to tackle or afraid to write about, or?
For sure. I mean, I didn't want to get into my soldiers' personal lives. Anybody who's deployed knows there's at least somebody in the platoon who's having trouble back home. Yeah. If not multiple. I wasn't going to get into that. That's not the business of the internet. Bit later on in the deployment, one of our soldiers was very seriously wounded in a non-combat incident, but it was, he almost died. I wrote about it very carefully, because it wasn't for me to be distilling kind of information about what had happened or how. There was going to be an official Army investigation into that. I just had to be very responsible and careful with that, and focused more on how much the platoon missed him, and how integral a part of the platoon he'd been in. So he and his family who were reading, and I was aware of that, could hopefully take some pride in that we remembered him, we missed him, and we were proud that he was making it through.
Did you write about any casualties?
The one time, one of my good friends, another PL from the troop just next door to us, his vehicle got hit by an IED, and he was fine, but very possibly could not have been. And that was a lesson. That was a lesson learned. That the thing with the blog is I didn't realize who people were reading it until maybe a little later than I should have. And luckily he was fine. But he's like, dude, my parents found out that we got hit by your blog. I was like, oh, sorry, man. I'll let you handle next time. I'll let you handle it. You let me know what. After you've emailed them or called them.
Wow, that's crazy. So, I mean, you seem to take a very pragmatic approach to this whole thing. And obviously, I've read a couple of posts. I haven't had a chance to read everything. But, in what I gather, this was more of a fact-finding or, kind of detailed account of things that went on as opposed to an emotional or personal story.
Yeah, though there, yeah, at least consciously, I'm sure some of that other stuff was definitely there. How could it not be? Anybody that's written in a journal or detailed a powerful moment in their life, there's a lot more going on than just the five W's. But I wasn't aware of that at the time. Look, all these years later, looking back on it, I think the blog was an outlet for me. It was a way for a young man to try to make sense of what he was seeing and doing. I liken it to a jigsaw puzzle. You don't have all the pieces to, but the mere act of putting together the pieces you do have helps give some shape and texture to the puzzle as a whole. And that was the Iraq counterinsurgency in 2007, 2008. There was a lot going on the surface, and there was a lot more going on under the surface. And those sheikhs, Sunni and Shia, they were prepping for the wars to come, and some of them were open about that with us. I remember one powerful moment that I wrote about because I needed to, because it was so complicated. Was one of the Sunni sheikhs in the farmlands made it a point to show me photos of his great grandfather and grandfather and his father, and say he worked with the Ottomans, he worked with the British, he helped overthrow the king with the Ba'ath Party, and he wasn't being direct about it because that's not how their culture works. But after thinking it over, I think he was trying to make the point. He's like, this is our life. This is forever for us. No matter how long you all stay here, this isn't your home. And we've had conversations like this before with young officers far from home from other countries. We're allies. We're working together now, but you're going back to Hawaii here in a few months. This is the land that's belonged to my family for hundreds of years.
It's interesting, and I keep going back to this in my head as I hear you talk about, counterinsurgency and your experience. When I wrote in my journal, and I don't mean to kind of, give you my personal spiel, but mine was a lot more emotionally guided. One, because I didn't want to hold back. I really wanted to give my full thoughts and emotions on whatever I was going through. But the difference is my job, my first deployment was FID, Foreign Internal Defense, and it's slightly different than counterinsurgency, in that, I am inserted in an Iraqi unit working with these guys day in and day out, and my survival and my success depends on them. I mean, you guys could,
right.
In counterinsurgency, whether the Iraqis get up off the chair and do anything doesn't really depend on your mission. That's not the case in Foreign Internal Defense. But what I'm leading to is that the experiences I had were so emotionally moving at times, because I was standing next to these people in combat and standing next to them in meetings and everything else during the day, that was the only way I had to relate from them. I was telling their story sort of through my eyes at the same time. And I don't know if you kind of felt that way in your writing, but when you talk about your relationships with the Iraqis, it almost, I get the feeling like it's there, but it's still at arm's distance for you.
Sometimes, you got to know later, once I left my platoon and made captain, and I was sent over to an infantry battalion across the river. And I looked, in my new position, I worked a lot more closely with Iraqis in kind of a targeting cell, in kind of a joint targeting cell. And I got to know Iraqis, both police and military, on that kind of personal level that sounds like you did as well. But yeah, with the platoon, it was you were allies, not necessarily kin, and that could cause some friction at points. Because they had 30 other Iraqis in their platoon, and I had 29 American soldiers. That when we got back to the base, that they had a floor, and we had a different floor. And there were strengths to that, and there were probably drawbacks to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's just different experiences, and I was just curious as to kind of, the different approach to which you wrote the blog. Now, ultimately, the blog gets shut down because of what post? Why? Give me the background of all of it.
Sure. The short version is I made fun of my colonel, and he didn't like it. And there's a lesson there, both in the military and out. You can't make fun of your boss on the internet, no matter what.
You can if you do it the right way.
Be very careful about how you do it. How about that? They wanted. I got called in. They wanted to make me an XO, which was awesome. But I wanted to stay with my platoon. We just had that non-combat incident. I thought it was really important that the platoon stay, as a unit, as together and undisrupted as possible. Selfishly, being a PL was better than an XO. I knew that. And I also thought, the type of officers that I'd looked up to, that had mentored me, would maybe fight a little bit, not throw a tizzy fit or anything, but show that they wanted to be a ground leader. So I tried to do that, not expecting to win at all, but just like, well, sir, I'm probably not going to make the Army a career. What if maybe this should go to a different PL who's going to do that. I thought I was being clever. I thought I was being smart. I thought I was just doing what a good junior officer would do. It was not received that way. I think it was received as me being too big for my britches or something, me being cocky or not wanting to be in to help this other unit or something like that. I got chewed out pretty bad. A conversation that we've all been a part of in the military. But I was pissed off.
Did the colonel himself chew you out, or was it your company commander?
No, it was the colonel himself.
Okay.
Do
you want to share the details of that chewing?
He just he wasn't the best leader of men. He tended to lead through intimidation, and
love those guys.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I made a lot of mistakes in this process as well. But it wasn't. Looking back on it, I don't think he would say he handled the best either. So I was just called all kinds of names. At this point, people at that stage of their officer career were under a lot of pressure for retention. There were so many junior lieutenants and captains getting out that they were starting to kind of grade lieutenant colonels and colonels by that. So I wonder if maybe that was a factor too. But regardless, I went back to my hooch just really, really furious. So I did what I'd been doing the previous 6 months when I'd been confronted with a situation I didn't really understand. I wrote about it, and I pressed publish. Really, it was more of an event than anything else. It was kind of my first experience with the bureaucracy, and for the most part, I'd been a pretty good lieutenant. I wasn't used to being the guy called on the carpet like that, and I was surprised by it. Well, it got back to him pretty quick, maybe 2 or 3 hours, and that did not. So we had another conversation, another ass chewing, and well within his right to shut down the blog. We fight to protect constitutional rights. We don't necessarily get to abide by them while in uniform.
Yeah, we defend democracy. We don't practice it.
Exactly. So it got shut down, and little to my knowledge, one of the readers of the blog was a Washington Post reporter stationed in Baghdad. So he started doing some digging around, and a couple weeks later, I didn't talk to him, but a couple weeks later, they did a story kind of on the rise and fall of the blog, and put the blog really kind of in a positive light, and the colonel in a negative light, because it wasn't an anti-war blog by any means. It was just kind of a day-to-day night by night chronicle of one platoon's times. So that turned it into kind of a much bigger thing than it would have been otherwise. Without that story, all this probably, nobody cares beyond maybe the brigade.
So once the Washington Post gets a hold of it, and the reaction starts to be like, WTF, like what's going on here? What's kind of next in this whole scenario?
I mean, it was also strange and surreal because this stuff was happening while we're still going on patrols. So it was just kind of a weird I don't know, side circus kind of thing. I mean, Stars and Stripes reran the Washington Post article and put it on the cover.
Oh.
So I remember rolling into, we went back to Taji for refit operations.
Mm-hmm. And you went into the chow hall.
Went to the chow hall.
Yep.
and soldiers started asking me to sign it.
That's awesome. That is great.
And smart ass lieutenant that I was, I start doing it, and enrolls in I shit you not, enrolls in the brigade commander and the brigade sergeant major.
Oh,
and I was just like, oh my god, they're gonna. But they didn't say, to their credit, they didn't say a word. The sergeant major murdered me with his eyes, but so that was an interesting lunch. But yeah, the thing is, I because I hadn't talked to the Washington Post reporter, I hadn't violated at the time. It was all operational security.
Right.
Was and still is, of course, the big concern. I hadn't violated any OPSEC. So I got yelled at. I don't even think I got a counseling statement. I still got to my battalion commander's credit. He pinned on my captain's bars about a month after that. With a snide remark, of course, but he showed up and pinned on my bars. So it was there was a lot of smoke, maybe a little bit of fire, but it wasn't this kind of grand fight over the freedom of speech or anything.
It's that fine line between something being not right, but it's not wrong either. Just because it's not right doesn't mean it's wrong, and you didn't do anything wrong. But what you did was not right, so it's
totally.
It's in everybody's eyes how they want to view it. But that must have been a fun experience in the chow hall. And Stars and Stripes, for those non-military folks listening, it was the military's paper that everybody had in the chow hall overseas. It was all the news was 2 and 3 days late, but it was the only thing you had. It was the only newspaper there. It was the only thing to read. So it was everybody picked it up if there were any in the chow hall, and you'd sit there and eat your lunch, eat your dinner, and read the Stars and Stripes and. Whatever was in there was worthwhile reading to everybody, so that must have been funny. Yeah, it was. It was a strange, minor celebrity on Camp Taji for a day. Kind of fun, mostly just a distraction from the day-to-day life of patrols. So at this point in time, did you know you were getting out? Was it like any of this a catalyst of being like, what, I'm done. This is all I needed to know, and I'm going to move on? Yeah, I think so. I mean, I was leaning towards getting out anyhow. I enjoyed the Army. I liked the Army life. I liked soldiering, but doing it as a career just seemed. There were just other things I wanted to do, and I looked at good people who had made it a career, and saw that it could take a toll. It could take a toll on a person. So, but this was definitely kind of the thing that made it clear, kind of coming under the ire, under the microscope of the bureaucracy. I was like, yeah, this is all I needed to, this is confirmation of how I was leaning anyhow. I wanted to go back to something you talked about earlier about whether you felt like you had won the war or you had won your part of the war. And it's very interesting because, as I said earlier, I deployed from 05 to 06, and I did foreign internal defense for 15 months there. I was attached to the SF. It was the greatest experience of my military career to this day, and I've been in nearly 20 years. My second deployment to Iraq was in all of 2011, and it couldn't have been more miserable. It was one of the most useless times in my entire military career, and that's because the mission changed. And the interesting point is when you left, you said in early 2009, right, is when you guys got out of there.
February 09.
Okay, so when I look back on it, here's how I kind of characterize it. I don't know if you're familiar with boating or sailing, but they have a term called hull velocity, and hull velocity is a ship's ability to reach top speed based off of how it's constructed. So based off of the hull, it's the fastest you're going to go. And Iraq reached hull velocity about 2008, 2009, the latest. It was never going to get any better than where it was to that point. So when I look at my second deployment in 2011, we basically sat on a post for 11 months and got mortared and did absolutely nothing. Like we went there to leave, which was the most asinine thing in the world. Like we sent troops there just so they could turn around and come back. And it's not that I was more upset about, leaving my home, my family and everything else. That wasn't it. It was just on its surface, the mission made zero sense. And I'm going through the whole deployment and I'm watching these 06s and 07s and, all these high ranking officers with their claws in the rug like a cat trying to stay in Iraq, like finding reasons to try and stay. And I'm sitting here looking at everybody, and I'm an 04 at this time. I'm a major going, guys, wake up. Let's just go home. Like, what the hell are we doing here? But counter, as you said, 05 to 06, you won't convince me that for that period, we didn't win the war. For the mission that I had, for the unit that I was with, and everything that we were charged with doing, we won our section, our piece of the pie. Unequivocally, we did. We left Iraq better than when we got there. Now, I can't speak to anything that happened after I left, because I wasn't part of it. But, in that sense, I think a lot of us take our deployments in those small doses. You can only control what you can control. And for the part that we can control, or we controlled for that time from 05 to 06, it was an absolute win. Right. Everything after that, may have ended up in what people deem as failure, but I had no control over that, so I can't characterize it that way.
Yeah, no, I think that's really well said. I found as a vet personally, and then just in conversations with others, that taking the focus on what you did, what you impacted, your tours, your town, your quadrant, is all you can do, right? We were all one small piece of the green machine. On the macro level, I think, we'll spend the rest of our lives wondering, what if we hadn't fully withdrawn in 2011, though, as you just said, that it made sense in that moment, right? For some different reasons. And there were other different reasons to maybe stay a little bit longer. It's going to be a big what if game, but that's life. And kind of getting, I find at least, getting caught up in the very simple win loss. But that's just kind of childish. That's just not. It's not the type of wars America fights anymore, right? We're involved kind of all over the globe, doing things that can't really be contained by victory or loss. That can be tricky. That can do a toll on the psyche.
Well, and I think part of that is because war in and of itself used to be a physical extension of politics. And it's no longer that. Like, war no longer is diplomacy. It is a means of extending diplomacy, but it's not as final as it used to be. I mean, because by all intents and purposes, then 2003 was the end of the actual diplomacy part of the war. Because we went in there, rolled over, toppled the city, toppled the leader, got the hell out of Dodge. I mean, that was the end of the diplomacy. But from everything else after that, it was nothing but a political game going forward, and we were just a pawn as far as the military in holding ground in that political game. So, to your point, yes, to characterize it in win and loss terms is childish, as you say. But in the military world, we either know mission success or mission failure. It's a binary system. There's no other option. We don't deal in politics. We deal in mission success, mission failure.
Sure. What's the mission? That was the $1 trillion question. We were there, and seem can remain so. We're back in Iraq. Maybe a friend of mine recently said it's very possible that the veterans of these next wars will view our Iraq, the one we're talking about at least, kind of the way we view Desert Storm. As kind of a previous iteration of the same thing, with an interlude of when we weren't there. So more to be revealed, I guess.
When you look back on your experience, what do you take away from the deployment outside of the blog itself?
Things I'm most proud of is my platoon sergeant and I brought each and every one of our men home to live their lives. Whether they many of them stayed in the military, some of them got out. There's a lot of luck went into that. A lot of factors beyond us went into that, but that's something that matters a lot to me. Our platoon handled themselves really incredibly under fire, under tense situations. It was good, good training, good testament to my NCOs and their leadership, and maybe in a small part, a wary lieutenant, who didn't want to get his guys involved in something just because. It's something that I look back on and take pride in my service, pride in our small piece of the pie, and trying to reconcile that with the larger war, and how it turned out, and my great sadness for how the war turned out for the Iraqi people, really, because I saw the hope on their faces in 2008 and 2009 as things were slowly, steadily getting better. They deserve better. They just happen to be born and happen to be living in that part of the world where they went from a despot, living under a despot in Saddam to now 15 years of sectarian strife. 99% of those people don't deserve that. They deserve peace. So trying to reconcile that, my micro soldiering pride with a sadness for how it all turned out on the macro, I think really is a big reason why I write about it still. And trying to sort through that messiness and that murkiness, is really complicated, and there's a lot going on there in terms of history and culture and philosophy and everything, and that's where good literature, I think, can come from. Are those messy corners of existence? So that all that still kind of lingers. It's really long-winded to answer your question, I know, but I think all that kind of lingers within me still, both as a human being and as a veteran, but also as a writer.
Well, and that's a good segue to your novel, Youngblood. What's it about, and how did you come to write it? And was some of this more of an extension, sort of, your experience?
An extension, yeah, and I think an extension of my interest in this place and this war and how it all turned out. I'd already written about my experiences in the Surge and my platoon in Kaboom. In 2011, I'd gone back to grad school for creative writing, and it was very important to me at the time to write something else other than Iraq or the war, to show that I was an uppercase writer for some reason. But this is 2011, so you were over there, and I think for some very obvious reasons, I was watching the news, seeing how this was all going to turn out. Really hoping and praying that the stability and peace could hold. And so I started, I realized I was still really interested in this stuff. So I made a deal with myself and said, okay, you can write one 30-page short story, but it has to be set after you were there. So, you're not relying on your own memories. So you have to do some research and use your imagination. Well, that 30-page short story very quickly turned into a 300-page novel.
Wow.
So Youngblood's set at the end of the war, or near the end of the war, and it's also kind of a ghost story about the early Iraq War, so the 2004 time frame, as a they explore a possible love story between a lost Green Beret and a local Iraqi woman. I'm sure you had this experience too, and some of the listeners who are Iraq vets. You get over there and you start hearing stories about previous units and how they were. It was a little more wild, and it was, there's never a direct connection, right? It was always the unit before the one you're talking to, or the person that was there before the person you're talking to got there. And I was really interested in that, right? Because there's almost kind of this internal mythology that the army started to have within Iraq of how different units conducted themselves, or how different units experienced the country and the people. And that was really interesting to me. And the Iraqi people started to reflect this, right? Like they knew different units had different reputations. That the Eagle soldiers, the patch for the 101st, didn't shoot as quickly as the horse soldiers did, right? As First Cav did. That was the scuttlebutt in our section of Iraq. All that kind of really interested me. So when I sat down to write Youngblood and kind of explore different avenues, I very specifically said it at the end of the war, as kind of a way to maybe look back and try to capture the whole 8-year conflict in a way that my memoir, my nonfiction, had just focused on the late surge. By kind of having prominent Iraqi characters and a bit of a detective story to it, trying to sort through part myth from reality. I could better explore the entire conflict and its consequences on the Iraqi people.
It's funny you say that. I wish you would have known me back when you started writing the book, because I could have told you in 2011 we were there, it wasn't going to last. I could tell from the climate that when we left, everything was going to crumble, and we were going to have to start all over from scratch. And so
that's what. I talked to some of my former soldiers. Were over there. New Dawn, right? You call
yep.
It Operation New Dawn.
That's technically what I deployed under, Operation New Dawn.
Yep, and they said the same thing. Completely different feeling, they said, from when we'd come back in 2009.
Yeah, and that's why I characterize it as disappointing, because look, I was 26 when I got to my first deployment. I was young, and I didn't know what to expect. I didn't even know what I was doing. I felt so out of place. And I was thrown into the deep end, and I learned to swim, and I did really well, and it was just such an incredibly rewarding experience. And even to this day, I got back. We're 12 years past, almost, when I got back, and I still look back on that experience with such fond memories, as I said before. But I look back on my second deployment, and I look at it as a year of my life that I can never get back. And it's not like I missed anything like home, other than family stuff, but it's just one of those things where it's like I did not. I'm a very rubber meets the road kind of military guy. I got to be where things are happening. And as you go up the ranks, as you know, on the officer side, you get further away from that stuff. And it gets really irritating, because it's almost like you don't feel the sense of your purpose. And any soldier, from the private with a rifle on the front lines to anybody, all they want to do is just have a purpose. And when you get that purpose taken away from you because of bureaucratic and political stuff, you feel like you're wasting your time.
Yeah, no, and that reason to be, right? I think it's something I still miss about the soldiering life. That at its best, the military can provide that, and that's something that can be tricky to explain to civilians sometimes. But I think it's important to convey that every day, those 15 months. It was like adrenaline straight to the veins, right? I mean, what clearer purpose could there be than go out on patrol, accomplish the assigned mission, stay, and stay alive and keep
survival.
Alive.
Survival in and of itself is the clearest purpose. So
sure.
that certainly feeds that need. Let me ask you a question about Kaboom. Have you gone back and read it ever?
Yeah, and parts of it are good, and parts of it are embarrassingly bad. Parts of it are just a much younger person, a much more inexperienced person, I can laugh at him, and I can feel for him, but those experiences helped shape him into who I am. So you can't be too down on him. He was doing the best he could with what he knew and what he was equipped with. You wish he'd been a little wiser, and maybe a little less fiery, but on the other hand, the kid had courage, and how can that be a bad thing?
No, not at all. Now, is the blog still available for people to read?
Yeah, one of my friends archived it. So that was a funny thing that when they shut it down, I was trying. They just created. He created a mirror site, and then some other people created mirror sites too, in case his got shut down. The people that I didn't even know. So I was trying to explain to the battalion commander what a mirror site is, and how you can't control the internet. And yeah,
I could just picture this going, sir. It's out there. There's nothing you're going to do.
There's no going back now. So yeah, it's off the top of my head, it's Kaboom War Journal Archive.blogspot.com.
Okay.
And it's very much kind of a late aughts blogspot type of technology. It's not clean and sleek looking like a modern Tumblr or anything. So it still looks the part of 2008. That's for sure.
And there it is. Matt Gallagher, just an incredible journey, an incredible tale. I think courage is a great word, to put your thoughts out there and write them out there. Like I said, I wrote a journal, but I didn't put it out there for the world to see. And it takes courage to be able to do that and let the world kind of critique you and your thoughts and everything. And I'm glad Kaboom was so successful. I'm sorry it ended the way it did, but obviously, again, the novel Youngblood, great things for that and great reviews of it. But, all in told, your military experience is a unique one. And certainly we thank you for being part of the Hazard Ground.
Hey, appreciate it having me. Enjoyed our conversation.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno and produced by Matt Pasquarella. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at hazardgroundpodcast@gmail.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.